Fall camp is here for NC State football, and we've been doing a lot of content at Inside Pack Sports on the Wolfpack's offense, and rightfully so. CJ Bailey, Hollywood Smothers, a bunch of receivers, Justin Jolie, a lot of weapons for NC State, but there's some questions on the defense, and we're going to discuss the defense today, take a look at a lot of different topics on the defensive side. I've got Phillip Danford with me, and Phillip, let's jump right into it. Defensively for NC State, new defensive coordinator. That's the big change, right? Tony Gibson has been NC State's defensive coordinator since the 2020 season. He's been responsible for a lot of NC State success, let's be honest, right? A lot of these wins were built on that defense. But there's some things you can look at defensively. NC State was very rigid in how they played under Tony Gibson. You knew going in what you were going to get. And it seems like we're going to see NC State tweak that a little bit and go in a completely different direction and maybe be more multiple this year under first-year defensive coordinator DJ Elliot.
Yeah, I believe that's what you're likely to see, right? When you look at Elliott coming from the Dave Aranda tree, there's going to be some big changes. It's going to be big changes up front, where they're much more multiple up front when we talk about the front seven, front six, however you want to look at that. But the back end as well, you're looking at more quarters coverage most likely. But I think one of the biggest things is a question, James, that we broached how many times last year, in the sense that it felt like teams had a little bit of a playbook against Tony Gibson. If you could get multiple tight end sets, you could get into bigger sets, in the counter game, the power game, more downhill. It felt like you had an advantage very much over that NC State defense, that 3-3-5 stack, and how they were going to align to it. And they were very rigid. I mean, we knew, when we did, our walkthroughs on Monday night when we were talking, when teams came out and tripped snub, we knew exactly who was going to align where every time. So it did become very predictable, so to speak. And I think that's one of the things Coach Doeren is probably looking to address, right? If not giving teams that, hey, we think we have a way to beat this defense, so let's line up this week, 12 personnel, 21 personnel. We're going to make it tough on them. We're going to play inside the box, and they're going to have to defend it and defend multiple gaps with players that probably don't want to defend multiple gaps. How many times last year did we talk about teams getting big and having to get a guy like Aiden White into a gap? That's not what Aiden White's here for, right? And so I think that's what Coach Doeren is really trying to address, situations like that.
And as we keep going here, I want to mention Phillip is remote. We wanted to get him on here, so obviously there may be a little bit of connection issues, but we're going to work our way through it. I'm with you, though, Phillip. I think the multiple elements of this defense is something that we know Dave Doeren and DJ Elliott. It's funny. I'm trying to think back to, when NC State was looking to make this defensive coordinator hire, what do you think the pitch was from DJ Elliott to Dave Doeren? And I think it had to be, we're going to be extremely multiple. We're going to go in a different direction. And I know one of the guys you've been researching, Dave Aranda, will consider one of the top defensive minds in college football. DJ Elliott has worked alongside him, bringing that Baylor-style defense to NC State. I feel like that might have been the pitch, Phillip.
Yeah, I absolutely think it was a pitch. Dave Aranda, for anybody who's a scheme nerd in football, you have listened to a Dave Aranda coaching clinic or anything like that. Soft-spoken guy, but extremely intelligent, right? Very nuanced in what he does. And so that's going to be fascinating. It's going to bring a completely different approach to, again, the front and the back of the defense. Let's talk about, to me, one of the interesting things is how, in terms of how this is going to meld. Well, let's talk about the back end and the safeties real quick, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you watch Dave Aranda, he is very ardent base coverage in the secondary. Now, as I've watched some of DJ Elliott's film, whether it be his stints at Temple, his stints at Kansas, things of that nature, he was quarters based, but he would rotate into cover three more than Dave Aranda does. So I'm curious, how much did Dave Aranda and that influence really rub off to maybe a greater degree last year when he was an analyst? But if we look at the roster, I guess here's where I find, some question marks in my head. Let's take a guy like Ronnie Royal.
Mm-hmm.
So, James, when they recruited Ronnie Royal, what were the highlights? Like, what were you thinking of? What player did you comp him to?
Tanner Ingram.
Yeah, I agree. That's who we all comp him to. But if you look at a quarters-based defense, those safeties, their safeties are playing a lot of coverage. They're not they're not in the box as much. So does a player like a Ronnie Royal fit this scheme as much as he previously fit a Gibson scheme, right? So to me, there's questions like that, right? Where I would think if he's going to play, he's probably going to be more coverage based than we would have out of the 3-3-5. To me, it's a question like that. And then you get to the nickel, where, State's had the luxury of some terrific nickel defenders over the years, right? I think back to a guy like a Tyler Baker-Williams. That's a guy who could play in the box. He could play out in coverage. Well, in this defense, the nickel is going to be closer to the box. There's going to be less coverage base. So do you have that body type who's probably going to be in and around the box and in the short to intermediate areas more than the deeper areas? So, and I know this is kind of off the wall maybe, but does a guy like a Ronnie Royal actually slide down into nickel to kind of fit that more, and they put somebody else? There's so many questions to me in terms of how this personnel group fits with what I see scheme-wise, or maybe I'm somewhat predicting we're going to see.
Oh, I had down on my list to ask you about the DBs because I struggled with nickel. It was one. I remember we did a Zoom call with Tony Gibson, and he talked about the nickel being maybe the most important position in their defensive scheme. When I looked at NC State's roster, Phillip, they had 2 nickels listed on the official roster. It was Isaiah Crowell, who I believe is injured, and a redshirt freshman in Assad Brown, who has yet to play. You need, if you're going to have a nickel, you need more than that. So, Is it possible they get away from playing a nickel and you play, more 4 DB looks? Yeah, you mentioned the Royal move, which I think makes some sense. What about going completely outside the box and moving Sean Brown to nickel and getting another linebacker on the field? Is that a possibility in this scheme?
Yeah. I've thought about that too. Now it's like, man, I don't know how much he's put on in terms of weight, mass,
right,
and if that's hurt him, but yeah, I mean, I could absolutely see that. I mean, to me, that fits what I see as the nickel in this quarters-based defense that Aranda runs more so than maybe even an Isaiah Crowell, who is on the smaller side, right? He was more of a coverage-based DB than maybe what I think they're going to need. So, I'm just not going to be shocked, at least the way I think it's going to play out, to see a lot of movement in that back end. A guy that they have listed as a safety might be a nickel, in terms of the roster, or cornerback might be a safety. I think they're going to try to mix and match a ton of guys to figure out who kind of fits what right now.
Yeah, and I want to go to linebacker because one of the things that NC State's done here this year is they've gone out and added a bunch of options at the linebacker position. We know last year they ended the season after the Caden Fordham injury, starting Sean Brown, Devon Betty, and Kamal Bonner. Devon Betty graduated. Kamal Bonner has transferred to Miami, transferred out during the spring. But when you look at this linebacker room, Phillip, there's a bunch of bodies there based on how they have these players labeled. I mean, I've already mentioned Sean Brown, who's returning. You do get back Caden Fordham. You added Bailey Benson, a transfer from Wake Forest. Sterling Dixon, a transfer from Alabama. Trey Thomas and Cian Sloan are both listed at linebackers. How's that going to work out? Kenny Soares, a transfer linebacker from Northwestern. One of my favorite players that they brought in out of the transfer portal, AJ Richardson from Norfolk State, was extremely productive in his 2 years at Norfolk State. You have him available now as an option. That's what I mentioned, Sean. That's why I mentioned the Sean Brown move potentially, because you've added a bunch of different guys there who I think could compete for playing time, completely different than the way we looked at this position group last year. You remember going into it last year where it was Sean Brown was moving from safety. You had Caden Fordham, who you thought could step up, and then you had kind of your old veteran Devon Betty, and then nothing else.
Yeah, you have McBride and a couple guys. You just like, man, I'm not sure how he's going to fit.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Like I think we know you've got Brown, you're getting Fordham back. What do you think of them having Thomas and Cian Sloan listed at linebacker? Because I know for me, like, I view those guys as potential edge players, edge rushers. Does that some sort of tell maybe and what they be looking to do with this defensive scheme?
I think so. Honestly, where I'm at, looking at the roster and kind of watching film, I think Cian Sloan. I think he'll be the guy. Because the way I kind of picture this playing out is they're going to have the four guys along the front, but one of them is going to be now. Teams have different names for him. The most common name is a jack, right? What they call the jack position. And that's really like a stand-up linebacker. He can put his hand in the ground. Usually he plays to the boundary because this is a guy that if you're running, for example, simulated pressures, which we know DJ Elliot has a history of, this is a guy that might drop back and he might play the flat in pass coverage to the boundary. I kind of think a guy like Sloan, especially when you look at Sloan's size, right? They have Sloan listed about 250, and he's much more than the other linebackers. He's much bigger than the other linebackers. So it makes sense to me that he's going to kind of be that walk down, potential stand up, potential hand in the ground, where let's say, let's put it this way. I think the front is going to go along with the linebackers from the standpoint of the way I think this will happen. If folks remember the tight front that NC State's been running with the three-man defense or three-man defensive front the last couple of years, you have Brandon Cleveland, who was a nose, right? He's a zero technique right over the center. And then you had two defensive ends who were four eyes, and they were inside of the tackles. I think you still might get that against spread offenses, and then you have a stand-up linebacker outside of them. But then if you get, let's say, offenses that want to go to bigger personnel packages like we've talked about earlier, 12 personnel, then I think you're going to get the more true four-man fronts where you get the over front, the under front, maybe a jet front where you've got 2-3 techniques. And that's where I think a guy like Sloan easily transitions to a hands-down defensive end. And it's one guy, and he's up and he's down, but you're still kind of creating that four-man void or four-man, predicament for the offense right there, along the front. So to me, Sloan seems to fit the mold of what I picture a jack backer being.
Yeah, I think he's I labeled him in our 2 deep depth chart, the wild card for this defense, because he's getting talked up a lot. He was extremely productive. He had 34 pressures at Utah State last year. He had 28 in his last 8 games of the season. I told you this stat. Davin Vann had 26 for the year to lead NC State last year. So obviously different program, maybe different scheme, but this guy profiles as a pass rusher, a guy that can get after the quarterback. And I know for me going into the year, before I even cared about the defensive coordinator, you know me, Phillip, I typically don't care about those guys as much as I do the players anyways. They had to get a pass rusher and more than one. I mean, because you lost Van, and I just had no confidence in what you had returning. Not to say those guys can't develop in that, but nobody else had really shown they profile as a potential pass rusher, even at the linebacker position. I didn't see it maybe as much as I thought I potentially could from Rashawn Brown. I mean, you go back to some of those better, sack years under Tony Gibson, you were getting them from Drake Thomas and Peyton Wilson. It didn't feel like you had that same pressure from the linebacker position as you had either. And so getting Sloan, Trey Thomas, Sebastian Harsh, another guy we know they like out of Wyoming, I thought those were critical additions.
Yeah, and I agree with you. There was, we talked about it all year. There was a lack of pass rush. A guy like Sean Brown, who, while he got accolades because he did some really good things, he was a guy who very much got lost in the sauce when it came to the offensive line, shedding blocks and things of that nature. I mean, frankly, that's something I talked about Devon Betty for a long, long time, inability to shed blocks. You really lost that ability, it felt like, last year. And so once there was engagement with the linebackers and any O-line or tight ends, it just kind of felt like that's it. At best, you're looking at a stalemate. So it was a priority to bring these guys in, whether that's a Harsh from Wyoming, which I'm fascinated. That's a guy that I initially thought was going to be really run-based, but maybe he's more of a pass rush guy, right? That's something me and you have talked about on the side, And so, how all these guys fit in, boy, it's going to take all 25 practices this fall to figure it out.
Let's talk a little bit about some things NC State needs to address defensively from 24 to 25. One of the stats that stood out to me, Phillip, from last year, NC State was 117 nationally in opponent long scrimmage plays of 30-plus yards. So they were near the bottom of the country in the most allowed 30-plus yard explosive plays, which is something that we thought typically under Gibson you were trying to really limit, right? But they struggled with that last year. When you look at a scheme change, is that something you can address schematically, or do you think it's more personnel based?
Well, I think this gets back to it is personnel to an extent. Everything will have a flavor of personnel to it. But I do think it gets back to some teams kind of figured out a little bit of how to play NC State, right? We talked about getting into bigger personnel sets, real heavy in the counter. I mean, James, how many times last year did we talk about it? A team running counter, and it's always the third guy that comes and fits counter that was wrong, right? They're in the wrong gap. They've got the wrong leverage. I mean, it just felt like that was happening over and over. And teams were exploiting that week in and week out. And it's like State just did not have the answer for it last year. And so, again, I think that's what predicated a lot of this stuff. And so, yeah, they have to get better, right? That's part of the name of the game. You can't give up explosives. Offensive, you want explosives. Defense, you can't give them up, right? You have to try to make teams, if they're going to score, you need to force them to have 8, 10, 12-play drives. Don't give up 3, 4-play drives where, it's a 30-yard chunk here, a 15-yard chunk there, and all of a sudden they're in the red zone. You can't give up that stuff.
I'm with you. I think that's one of the things, and you can do it. Like, I know one of the things that used to frustrate me a little bit. I love it when you got there, right? When you get there with the pressure, it's great. But how many times would we say, hey, just drop 8 here? And you get after giving up an explosive, right? I think back 2 years ago, the one that really sticks out to me was, I feel like it was the game against Louisville where I think State brought pressure and left a corner on an island in that game at home. It might have been 2nd and 15. And I think Chris Bell caught the long touchdown. I want to say it was over Shaheed Battle in one-on-one coverage. Yep. And it was just a 50-50 jump ball because you blitzed, didn't get there. You left with one guy in coverage. And in a low-scoring game, I think State lost that game, 13-10 maybe? In a low-scoring game, that one touchdown proved to be the difference. And so I think schematically, you talk about playing more quarters coverage. You talk about playing more with your safeties in coverage. I know one of the things you talked about a lot under Tony Gibson, the single high look, and how often you got close coverage under Gibson.
Yeah. I mean, they did. They lived in single high. It was cover 1, cover 3, or cover 0 was their alternative. And I remember 2 years ago, State led the country in cover 0. And it was they led the country by a notable margin. Now, last year it wasn't as high, but still, cover 0 is a big part of this defense, especially when you get in high leverage situations, right? We can all think back to the Miami game where they catch that slant over there. I mean, it's happened, but they've also hit big on it too. So I'm not going to say it was all bad. You get positives
from it, 100%.
But that is the type of play that I don't think you'll see this year. You'll get a couple reps of cover 0. Don't get me wrong. Everybody runs it to some degree, but it will be nothing like under Tony Gibson, in my opinion. This will be very much more of a bend, don't break style in the secondary than what we previously saw.
I know there's been, again, discussion of being more multiple. Well, I think back 3, 4, 5 years, Phillip, to where the talk defensively was, hey, we can't sub. Teams are playing too fast, right? The old Nick Saban complained about pace and tempo and all those different things. Is the game shifting back to now you're seeing more personnel changes offensively and more fullbacks and tight ends and less spread to where you can now be more multiple again because you can sub? And is that maybe a reason why we've seen State bring in so many different options? I mean, I can't recall a depth chart where State has, and again, a lot of it's this portal era of just being able to bring in so many guys. But think about, I named all the potential linebacker options of guys who played at different spots. You've got it at corner, you've got it up front. Is that something that we may see State saying behind the scenes, hey, now we can take advantage of that because you can go back to subbing more?
Yeah, if offense is going to sub now, that gives you the opportunity to match, right? And that's something, man. This gets back to, I've already mentioned this probably the third time. State did not match personnel.
No.
I think they will very much try to match personnel now, right? Because look at all the different body types, right? We talked about Cian Sloan being a 250-pound linebacker, and then you turn around and you've got Adadir who, I mean, he's maybe 213, 215. I mean, you've got a wide range of body types now, skill sets. So I very much think you can match personnel now, unlike they were willing to do under Tony Gibson. And so, yeah, Tony Gibson, that was a defense that could play against up-tempo offenses, And so I think you actually saw it less and less because they were so adept at it. Now State is answering to that, I believe.
And look, I think I'm speaking for Phillip here. We're not questioning the great Tony Gibson, right? Like, Tony's system works. Yeah. It's great. All those different things. Like, this is just – and the way I look at it, Phillip, is I feel like a lot of times when you have coaching changes or you have a down year and you make a personnel change, you almost as a head coach or as a program, you go in a completely different direction, right? We've seen it with head coaching hires where if you had an offensive mind as your head coach and it didn't work out, what do? You go get a defensive mind and see if it works out. And so I'm looking at this defensive move and saying, I think Dave Doeren said, you know what? We're not going to run 3-3-5 anymore. So if you're not going to run that and you're going to go in a completely different direction, what are some of the things you're looking to tweak? And I think, like you just said, not matching personnel would be one of those things, because there were times where it was like, hey, do we really need Aiden White out there in this position at this point? Could you not sub him out and put maybe a bigger corner, maybe a safety in there to take it to try and limit what you knew was coming based on that personnel?
Yeah. No, and I agree with you. I last year was not what everybody wanted, but Tony Gibson's the man. I mean, what he did at NC State was phenomenal. So, yeah, I'm not bashing him. It's just the game evolving, right? This is the cat and mouse game of offense and defense. And so that's the only way I see it, right? If Tony Gibson was here, I think he'd have to adjust a little bit more this year, right, based on what we saw. But he's not. He got the job at Marshall, and so DJ Elliott's here. But, I agree with you. I mean, that's just, I feel like, that versatility was a selling point for DJ Elliott. That's what Doeren wants. So it'll be fascinating to see how they put it together. But, again, I'll go back to the comment I made earlier. A lot of players, that's a lot of scheme in a short period of time, right? And so I do have a little bit of reservation that things look crisp, especially early in the year. Do they have to kind of bring this in packages, so to speak? Maybe. Because I don't know. In my head, when I think about the installations and what all you could see, it could be a lot. So DJ Elliott has to have a very concise vernacular and teaching style to really get this through to everybody.
And we know Dave Doeren wants to win this first game. Well, look, he wants to win every game. But he's mentioned this East Carolina game and how important it is. I don't think ECU had a ton of change schematically. I believe they kept their D coordinator. I mean, their offensive coordinator. I know their head coach was their D coordinator, so I'm sure they're probably staying similar defensively. So the change in this matchup from the Military Bowl to this first game is a completely new defensive scheme for NC State. And I think that's maybe why you've seen a little bit of this, no spring practice and spring game and hiding some of the stuff potentially from a scheme standpoint, because I don't think ECU really knows what to expect from NC State's defense. They're kind of probably doing what you did. You went and watched Dave Aranda and Temple tape and Kansas tape. That's about all you can do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a bit of a guessing game right now. And I guarantee they're doing the same thing. They've gone back and watched all that stuff I talked about plus more, right? They've probably gone back and looked at the linebackers and how they moved when he was with the Eagles and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure they've thoroughly broken down everything DJ Elliott's done. They've watched every YouTube video he's ever been a part of. But in the end, it is a bit of a guessing game because the personnel and what he decides to do with it, we won't know until kickoff.
All right, Phillip, by the time this is posted, NC State's fall camp will be underway. But prior to the start of fall camp, I posted a projected two-deep defense for NC State heading into fall camp. So I want to go over these position groups with you before we go and get your thoughts. Tell me maybe something you like, you don't like, maybe a player you've got your eye on. Let's start here on the defensive line, where I did go with a 4-down front. Starting at defensive end, I had Joseph Adedire and Chevali Price, backed up by Sebastian Harsh and Josh Alexander Felton. I know that's actually wrong. Isaiah Shirley should be on there behind Chevali Price. I don't know why I did not have Isaiah Shirley on there. That will be edited, Mr. Danford. and at nose tackle and defensive tackle, I had Brandon Cleveland and Chaz Wallace starting, backed up by Justin Terrell and A.J. Prim. I'm actually editing that right now. But your thoughts on that defensive front?
Well, I think one of the big things is I think this sets up for Brandon Cleveland to have a big year, right? We talked. I do think he'll still play some zero tech and be that true nose that we've watched now since he's been at NC State.
Mm-hmm.
But he will have more opportunity now to slide to a shade, the 1 tech, a 2 tech, and even possibly a 3 tech based upon passing situations, right? That's something we've seen quite a bit on film. He will have more one-on-one opportunities now than he's ever had. And so, this is somewhat of a money year for Brandon Cleveland and NFL aspirations. I think this sets up for him to potentially, at least statistically, have a very good year. So I'm very much keeping my eye on Brandon Cleveland. We said before, I think the four-man front, in my opinion, is going to be Sloan actually as a linebacker sliding down. I think that's what it's going to be versus Adadir or Harsh. But again, that's a guess on my part.
Yeah, and they could maybe factor in at the other side. That's where we talk about the competition. I mean, you're bringing in Adadir and Harsh. Harsh had 20 pressures last year at Wyoming and 180 snaps. I told you about that number. We were really impressed with it. I mean, he showed he can – that's a good rate to where – I mean, this is a guy who, even if he can be similar to what you may not get the 7 sacks you got from Red Hibbler 2 years ago, but think about that profile, right, Phillip, or that role where you brought a guy in. State did not have that last year. And now you look at a guy like Harsh, you've got a guy like Sloan, where you feel like you're going to have the options for that.
Yeah. I mean, the ability to rotate, right? State had a very short rotation last year, and it felt at times, I think we've talked about Trevally Price wasn't 100% last year, but he had to go, right? There felt like situations where he just had to go. There wasn't the depth at that position. It feels like this year you truly have the depth. So if something happens, you should be able to get a Harsh or a Sloan or Adadir or a Trey Thomas, potentially even slide down there. I mean, you have – it just didn't exist last year, especially when Hibbler departs so early in the season. I think they really counted on him to be a major player. When he leaves, I don't know, week 3 or whatever it was, I mean, I think that really had a big effect on the year.
Oh, I think it was big. I don't think they went out and added a portal pass rusher because you were bringing back Red Hibbler, and that was his role. And that's one of the ones that I thought really damaged their season because you had nobody to replace that. Let's move to linebacker, where we went with Sean Brown, Caden Fordham, and Trey Thomas as your starters at weak side, middle, and strong side, backed up by Kenny Soares, A.J. Richardson, and Keon Sloan. Phillip, so you've got 4 transfers on there flanking Sean Brown and Caden Fordham.
Yeah. I mean, Sean Brown will play. I think that's a given. Fordham, it's all whether he's healthy or not. I do think he'd be the starting backer, assuming he's fully healthy and fully cleared for, all activity. I know he's been cleared for activity. I don't know if that includes contact and all that stuff.
Right.
Maybe we'll find that out here, early in camp. But if he's there, I think he'll play. A.J. Richardson is fascinating, right? To me, he profiles as a true Mike linebacker, right? Very productive, at Norfolk State. I mean, I'll be kind of curious early in the year. Do we see a heavy rotation at the mic to try to kind of work Caden Fordham back in at a slower pace than maybe normal?
Well, I wanted to ask you, I know you mentioned maybe a 4-2-5 defensive scheme. How would that impact Sean Brown if you're going with a 2 linebacker look? Is that something that he should be fine at physically? Because he is an undersized linebacker. Do you typically want 2 bigger guys in there?
I think he'll be fine. I mean, he played so much in the box last year. He'll still be the weak side linebacker. So your Mike is going to be responsible for fitting in the interior gaps, and he'll be responsible for B gap, C gap, stuff like that for the most part. I think he'll be fine. He's had so many reps down there. I'm going to let him play. I'm not pulling the ripcord yet.
At nickel, I had no clue what to do here, Mr. Danford. I went with starter, redshirt freshman Jaron Sensabaugh, a transfer from Missouri, backed up by redshirt freshman Assad Brown. I don't know if either one of those guys will be on the 2 deep there for certain if it's released by NC State. And that goes back to what you talked about. I had in the article, keep an eye on player movement. Don't be surprised to see one of the names below it, safety or corner, move to nickel. That's not to say Sensabaugh Brown can't win that job. I just think what they're doing at nickel, it seems to be a total unknown.
100%. 100%. We talked about it, at the start of this. In my projection, based upon watching film, I think the nickel is going to play very differently, and it might play more to a bigger back or a bigger, defensive back. Maybe that's a Royal, right? Maybe he slides down. We'll see. I mean, Royal is really fitting that single role. That's the role I don't see in this defense. I don't see that role. So where does he go? I think nickel actually makes some sense, but Sensabaugh, I know he's got football in the blood with his dad and everything else. I think he was recruited fairly highly, went to Missouri, and so maybe he's that guy. I'm not sure.
Yeah, last year State struck gold with the redshirt freshman and Marcus Cooley out of the transfer portal at that same nickel position. Maybe they feel like they can do it again with Sensabaugh, similar profile with Cooley coming in from Maryland. At safety, starters J.J. Johnson and Rente Hinton, backed up by Zach Byers, and you mentioned Ronnie Royal. Your thoughts on the players, and also in this scheme, how would you label the two safeties? I just went with safety here. What do you feel like? Do you feel like the responsibilities are going to be for your free and strong?
I mean, they'll probably play a boundary field.
Okay.
Right? And so, for the most part, I think they're going to be somewhat similar. Now, if you go back and look at DJ Elliot at Temple in Kansas, he did rotate to cover 3 more so than like a Dave Aranda did last year when we watched Baylor film. So that will be one of our keys to watch. Do we see rotation? And if so, one of those guys will probably be the primary guy, the post safety, as we call them, in a one high defense. I'm not sure who that'll be. To me, the one that stands out when we're talking body types, I'll go back to it. I don't think Rente Hinton fits the body type for safety in this defense. Like tall, I mean, maybe he's a guy that slides down, but he's a guy that I just, as I watch film, I don't know if I see that. I don't know if I see a guy who can play in space, right? Because you got to think about, why did Coach Gibson hate quarters so much? Because, you've got these rules in quarters. And if, you get a slot receiver, the number 2 receiver, and let's say he runs 9 yards, well, it's just man coverage all the way. And now you've got Rente Hinton playing a lot more man than you might have in a cover 3 defense, for example. And so that's one of the reasons Coach Gibson talked about staying away from it. So you better have defensive backs or safeties who can cover in this defense, because teams are going to take advantage of that.
Rente Hinton is listed at 6'3", 211 pounds on NC State's official roster. Sean Brown is listed at 6 foot 216. Just to give you an idea of what Phillip's talking about here with Hinton's size. Yeah, I think he is the projected starter right now. So we'll see how things work out there through fall camp. Moving on to corner. This one, man, I feel like they've got multiple options here. We know they returned Devon Marshall and Jackson Vick, 2 guys who played a lot down the stretch for NC State. But they also went into the portal and they brought in Jamel Johnson from Temple, Brian Nelson, I believe it's North Texas. Both players were all conference players at their previous stops, Phillip. And I don't know, but I think we feel like Devon Marshall should be slotted in as a starter. Man, could one of those guys play nickel for you? I'm just trying to figure out how. It seems like maybe a Jamel Johnson, Brian Nelson, or Jackson Vick, 2 of those guys may not be on the field for you.
Yeah, no, it very much could be one of those. I really like Brian Nelson's film coming out of North Texas. I kind of think he could be
the corner, the guy.
Devon Marshall. Yeah. And so maybe that slides Jamel Johnson down into a nickel potentially, right?
Yep.
And I'm not saying Jamel Johnson's film was bad either, right? I mean, they're all conference, both of them, for a reason. So, I mean, I think they were great picks, especially Brian Nelson. To be so late in the portal cycle and pick up Brian Nelson, I thought was one of the bigger pickups of the entire transfer cycle. I really like him. He actually somewhat kind of reminds me of Devon Marshall. I really liked. I know we talked about it. I don't think we got into it too much last offseason. Devon Marshall's film at Villanova was really good. I remember going back and watching them play UCF in the All-22, and UCF had a receiver. He's in the NFL now. He was
Baker.
He was at Alabama. Yeah. Devon Marshall really played well against him. And to me, you saw that and you're like, oh, he can 100% handle this level. Well, I think you saw some of that with Brian Nelson too, where you really feel confident that, hey, man, he plays some good receivers out there, especially in a conference that throws it around all over. I feel good about Nelson.
All right, Phillip, let's wrap this thing up. I've got one final question for you. Went through a lot of the personnel and different things with NC State's defense. Give me one guy you're excited to see what he can do this year, this season. Is there a player who you feel like, I think how he plays might dictate how this defense is going to play this year? Maybe it might be more than one, but is there a guy or two?
I mean, I mentioned him earlier. So I'll repeat this a little bit. Brandon Cleveland, he will have an opportunity to get more of those counting stats that everybody loves, but I think impact the game in a bigger way than he had prior. I think Cleveland is really set up for this shift in defensive style to get more one-on-ones, to have more impact up front on a regular basis. So I'm really, really watching him. Caden Fordham, I think, is important, but I just don't know about the knee. I mean, people are recovering from ACLs faster now than they ever were. And I think it's important to have that continuity, that signal caller. They felt so comfortable with him last year, right? He was the green dot before he went down last year. I would hope he can get back on the field. I just don't know, right? You can't say right now.
I mean, you think back to Devon Boykin, last year. Right, he had a knee injury, and that was later in the year. He had it in the bowl practices in 2023. He never played last season. Now, again, it was a couple months after Fordham's injury, but he never returned to the field. And so we'll see. Fall camp's underway right now. So by the time this is posted, we'll know where Fordham's at based on what he's doing in fall camp. But I'm with you. I think that's a big question mark. I think that makes the addition of a guy like A.J. Richardson really big because he profiles exactly what you want in a middle linebacker. I mean, this was a guy, granted, it was at Norfolk State and then the MEAC, Phillip, but from the moment he took the field, he was a productive player. He was second-team all-conference as a true freshman. He was first-team all-conference and led his league in tackles as a sophomore. I think guys like that tend to be able to play. I think guys like that, and at minimum, look, I might need to cover the mic here a little bit, but you can still hear me. We've seen some serviceable play at linebacker over the last few years at NC State. I think at minimum he can be serviceable, right? And so interested to see where it goes with NC State's defense. Like I said, we already have the coverage flowing on the website from fall camp at www.insidepacksports.com. Make sure you check out the website. If you haven't done so yet, subscribe here at YouTube to the channel at Inside Pack Sports. I want to thank Phillip for joining us here tonight. We're going to continue to crank out the content here on YouTube over the next few weeks. So we appreciate everyone here checking us out, and see you again soon.